I only learned how to speak when I was 8 years old. Everyone in the Wentworth family calls me an idiot. Even my mom secretly wipes her tears away, thinking that she's given birth to an autistic son. My dad looks at me with disappointment in his eyes. But he never sends me to a special needs school due to his need to preserve the family's reputation. One day, from Broadwell Street, comes over to purchase my family's company, Wentworth Group. He puts on a high and mighty attitude and berates everyone in the meeting room to the point that they can only hang their heads in shame. Despite the room being filled with the company's elites, no one dares to respond to Winston. As I stand in a corner, I feel my eyelids drooping while listening to Winston's tirade. Ah, how annoying. So I take a step forward and utter my first ever sentence in Winston's mother tongue. My name was Nathaniel Wentworth. I was the eldest grandson of the first branch of the Wentworth family and the sole direct heir to Wentworth Group. By all accounts, I should have been living a picture-perfect life, spoon in my mouth. But I was already 8 years old, and I still hadn't spoken a single word. Everyone in the household knew that I was a total idiot. Mom came from a highly educated family in Gander, gentle, elegant, and deeply cultured. She poured every ounce of her love into me. She would hold me in her arms, patiently trying to teach me over and over again. Nathaniel, say mommy. I would just stare right back at her, completely silent. The spark in her eyes would gradually dim until she turned around to discreetly dab the corners of her eyes with a tissue. She assumed I didn't notice, but I understood everything. It wasn't that I couldn't speak. I simply chose not to. I've been born with all the memories of my previous life completely intact. In my previous life, I was a fast-talking financial analyst on Broadwell Street. I spent 30 years running my mouth until I was thoroughly burned out. This time, I plan to quietly coast along as a useless trust fund baby and enjoy the high life. Unfortunately, I heavily underestimated the sheer weight of my position. Grandson of the Wentworth family wasn't a ticket to endless luxury. It was a gilded cage. Dad was the chairman of Wentworth Group, a cutthroat businessman to his core. Yet, every time he looked at me, a tiny flicker of desperation would dance in his eyes. Nathaniel, do you know what these figures represent? He asked, pointing to the numbers on a quarterly financial statement. I nodded. Can you point out our net profit margin for this quarter? I reached out with my small hand and pointed precisely at the correct percentage. The expectation in his eyes flared. Then he leaned in closer, asking the one question he desperately wanted answered. Nathaniel, can you say daddy for me? I looked at him, maintaining my absolute wall of silence. The light in his eyes vanished instantly. Nothing remained but disappointment. A thick, suffocating wave of it sat in heavy, agonizing silence for a long time before suddenly getting up and striding out of the room. Dad let out a heavy, defeated sigh that felt solid enough to shatter every glass partition on the floor. I knew that if I weren't the only direct grandson, and if Mom's family didn't hold such massive leverage, my spot as the heir would have been stripped away years ago. Over time, even my cousins started treating me differently. Their initial caution quickly devolved into blatant, unmitigated mockery. Hey Nathaniel, did you actually understand a single word the tutor said during our eroding class today? The voice speaking was Sebastian Wentworth, my Uncle Frederick's son. He was only a year younger than me, but was incredibly articulate and a massive favorite of Dad's. I shot him a glance, not bothering to respond, but my total lack of reaction only made him grin wider. Oh right, I completely forgot. Sebastian said you're a once-in-a-generation prodigy. You were born knowing everything in the universe, unlike us mere mortals who actually have to hit the books. Sebastian, don't talk about Nathaniel like that, Charlotte Wentworth, my Uncle Edmund's daughter, chimed in with a fake display of sweetness. He just doesn't deign to speak to commoners like us, that's all. As the saying goes, speech is silver and silence is golden. They bounced off each other flawlessly. The nannies kept their eyes glued to the floor, but their shoulders were twitching in amusement. They were laughing at the mute. I walked right past them with a completely deadpan expression. It was like watching two monkeys in a barrel. They were a bore and incredibly childish. Mom saw everything, and it broke her heart. That night, she held me tightly in her arms again, her tears soaking through the shoulder of my shirt. My sweet Nathaniel, why won't you speak to me? She whispered. If you could just say one word, just a single word, I could die happy. I could feel her body trembling. It was the heavy despair of a mother who felt entirely helpless. My heart, after all, wasn't made of stone. For the first time, my resolve began to fracture. Perhaps it was finally time for me to speak. Just as I parted my lips, preparing to enunciate a long and used syllable, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed outside the study door. Malcolm Prescott, our butler, practically burst into the room. Mrs. Wentworth, we have a massive problem, he said. Delegation from Ashbury has arrived. The Broadwell Street hedge fund tycoon, Winston Pembroke, is already at the office. Mom's face instantly drained of color. Winston Pembroke. That name was a dark, suffocating cloud that had been hanging over Wentworth Group for months. He was the most ruthless vulture on Broadwell Street, a corporate raider who specialized in shorting and dismantling historic and Norian-focused conglomerates. Over the past few years alone, his fund had aggressively acquired 3 legacy corporations of our exact scale. What is he doing here? Mom demanded. Malcolm's voice shook. He's here to negotiate an acquisition. But his tone was incredibly insulting. He said that he was here to make sure the Wentworths bow out of the market with what little dignity we have left. Mom stumbled backward, catching her balance against the edge of the desk. A negotiated acquisition was just a polite euphemism for a hostile takeover. A massive corporate storm was about to breach our walls that I looked up, staring out the window at the bleak, gray horizon. It seemed my dream of quietly coasting along as a useless trust fund baby was officially coming to an end. Be it, there were always some fools rushing in to poke the sleeping bear. Dad called an emergency meeting at the penthouse conference room, summoning every prominent family member or in high-level executive along too. Left to stand quietly in the far corner of the room, it was family protocol. As the eldest grandson, I was required to be present for all major family events. In the past, I would usually find a blind spot, stand there all morning, and completely tune out. However, the atmosphere felt off. The conference room was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop, and a humiliated, dark pallor washed over everyone's face. Death had sat at the head of the long table, his expression dark enough to kill. Standing right across from him was a tall, middle-aged man clad in a custom-tailored suit. Behind his gold-rimmed glasses hid a pair of sharp, predatory eyes. This was Winston Pembroke, born with an Honorian face but a shark raised in the cutthroat waters of Broadwell Street. Mr. Wentworth, is this how the Wentworths treat their guests? Winston spoke, his Corvian flawless, though his tone dripped with mockery. I endured a grueling 14-hour flight from Newford, and this is the best your team can offer me? He extended a slender finger, gesturing dismissively toward the row of trembling executives lined up across the table. Just a room full of glorified bean counters who can do nothing but stare blankly at spreadsheets. I try to talk to you about capital, and you try to talk to me about sentimental value. I try to explain market indicators, and you give me a lecture on your century-old legacy. It's pathetic. Absolutely pathetic. He burst into a loud, arrogant laugh. Sound echoed sharply off the walls of the solemn conference room, grating on everyone's nerves. Mr. Pembroke, Randall Carlyle, our chief financial officer, slammed his hands on the table and stood up, body shaking with rage. This is a Wentworth Group board meeting. Your insolence will not be tolerated here. Winston shot him a sideways glance, disdain flashing across his face. Ah, Randall, I recognize you, Winston sneered. You were the one lecturing me yesterday about how a family business has soul. Let me tell you something about how we operate on Broadwell Street. A soul that doesn't generate profit means absolutely nothing. Only the weak try to mask their utter incompetence with sentimentality. Randall's face flushed crimson. He pointed a trembling finger at Winston, sputtering incoherently before choking on his own breath and collapsing backward. Mr. Carlyle. The surrounding executives scrambled to catch him as a wave of panic rippled through the conference room. Dad slammed his palm onto the table. Roll. That's enough. Winston reined in his antics a fraction, though the contempt etched across his face didn't fade in the slightest. He gave my dad a casual, incredibly half-hearted nod. Mr. Wentworth, I'm not here to waste your time, Winston said smoothly. Our hedge fund's investment committee has run the numbers. According to your stock price, Wentworth Group won't survive past next year. If you sell right now, you can still walk away with $3 billion. But once we deploy our short sellers, I'm afraid you won't even be left with $1 billion. Furthermore, we've taken an interest in Wentworth Group's commercial plot in the south of the city. We intend to redevelop it into luxury residential real estate. And finally, I've heard excellent things about your software engineering division. We want a complete acqui-hire of that entire team. Before he could even finish his sentence, the conference room devolved into chaos. A bottom-dollar acquisition, stealing our real estate, and poaching our technical team. This wasn't a standard acquisition. This was a calculated corporate raid to liquidate Wentworth Group. This is outrageous. Get out of here, Derek. We can't roll over for this guy. We have to fight back. Over by Uncle Frederick's side of the table, several hot-headed shareholders were already past their breaking point, shouting over one another. Winston sneered. Fight back? Be my guest. He shifted his gaze to Uncle Frederick, who was leading the outcry. I recognize you. You're the second son of the Wentworth family, correct? 3 years ago, you spearheaded that commercial development project. How much did you end up burning? $200 million? Or was it $300 million? Frederick's face flushed deep crimson, looking like a man who had been kicked in the teeth. His fists clenched so tightly the veins bulged against his skin, yet he couldn't utter a word. Winston turned his attention to another executive. And you're the marketing director, right? During Black Friday last year, how much did you dump into your ad spend? And what was your actual conversion rate? That pathetic single-digit growth didn't even cover your ad spend, did it? The director instantly lowered his head, embarrassment flickering across his face that Winston's eyes swept across the long table. One by one, every single shareholder who had just been screaming sank back into their chairs. Winston smiled with open contempt. Do you see the problem now? No one in this room scares me. I've read every annual report you've ever published. I know every one of your mistakes. I know which executives gamble, which managers inflate projections, which subsidiaries bleed cash, and which board members are too sentimental to pull the trigger. He spread his hands. I'm negotiating with people who don't even understand their own company. Silence. No one answered. Dad's jaw tightened so hard I thought his teeth might crack. For the first time since I'd been born, I saw him looking trapped. Everyone else saw Winston's arrogance. I saw something different. His models, his assumptions, his blind spots. They were practically glowing. He'd built his entire takeover thesis around publicly available information. Quarterly filings, analyst reports, satellite images, shipping data, consumer surveys. It was impressive. For an ordinary company, it would have been enough. For Wentworth Group, it was catastrophically incomplete. He didn't know about the battery patents hidden inside our research division. He didn't know that the city government was only days away from rezoning our southern commercial land into a high-tech industrial district, multiplying its value several times over. He didn't know our software division had quietly finished an enterprise AI platform that 3 Fortune 100 companies were already bidding on under strict confidentiality. He believed he was buying a dying company. In reality, he was trying to steal a company standing 1 week away from exploding in value. I rubbed my temples. This idiot. He'd flown 14 hours just to donate billions to us. Winston continued pacing. If no one has anything intelligent to say, I'll have my lawyers draft the acquisition agreement. He looked around the room. What? Has the legendary Wentworth family finally run out of words? My eyelids drooped. I'd heard enough. I stepped away from the corner. The movement was so small that nobody noticed at first, until I kept walking, past the assistants, past the lawyers, past the directors, straight toward the conference table. Sebastian snorted. The mute's wandering around again. Charlotte covered her mouth to hide a laugh. Maybe he wants crayons. Neither of them understood why every executive had suddenly frozen. I wasn't supposed to approach the table. Dad frowned. Nathaniel. Mom reached out instinctively. Nathaniel, come back. I ignored everyone. I stopped 3 feet from Winston. He glanced down at me with mild amusement. If Horizon Dynamics signs next Tuesday, and Northstar Logistics signs on Thursday, and Helix Systems exercises its purchase option on Friday, the division alone will be worth more than your entire acquisition offer. The room had become so quiet that even the air conditioner seemed deafening. One of Winston's lawyers slowly lowered his pen. Winston stared at me. The amusement in his eyes was gone. I tilted my head. Oh, I almost forgot. You also opened a $12 billion short position through 6 shell funds. You intended to crash our share price before announcing the acquisition. A clever strategy. A pity. I smiled for the first time since entering the room. You forgot to hedge against being wrong. The color drained from Winston's face. How do you know that? The room erupted. What did he just say? Nathaniel spoke? In English? No, not just English. That's Broadwell financial jargon. Dad slowly rose from his chair. His hands were shaking. Mom covered her mouth as tears streamed down her face. After waiting 8 years, she had finally heard my voice. But I wasn't finished. I looked directly at Winston. Mr. Pembroke, you came here believing you understood Wentworth Group. You don't. You understand spreadsheets. You don't understand this company. I slid the acquisition proposal back across the table. You came here to buy us. I pushed it until it stopped against his hand. But after today, you'll be far too busy explaining $12 billion in losses to your own investors. For several long seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Winston kept staring at me as though the 8-year-old standing in front of him had suddenly transformed into a ghost. Then he laughed. A slow, dismissive laugh. Cute. He looked around the room. So this is your strategy? The mute memorizes a few finance buzzwords and everyone is supposed to be impressed. Several of his associates laughed with him. Only they noticed something he didn't. None of the Wentworth executives were laughing. They were staring at me. Dad finally found his voice. Nathaniel. I ignored him. Instead, I looked at Winston. Your left inside jacket pocket. His smile faltered. The blue folder. Page 17. You've already prepared the post-acquisition layoffs. 3,412 employees. You plan to announce them exactly 48 hours after the acquisition closed. Winston's expression froze. No one outside his team should have known that. His assistant instinctively looked toward the folder tucked inside his jacket. Wrong move. Every Wentworth executive noticed. Whispers spread through the room. He's actually carrying one. Did the child guess? No. He couldn't have. I continued calmly. You also plan to sell our South District land within 90 days. Not because you wanted housing. Because Ashbury Infrastructure has already offered to buy it. You'd flip it before the rezoning becomes public. Dad's pupils contracted. Only 3 people inside Wentworth even knew rezoning negotiations existed. Winston slowly removed the blue folder. His fingers had tightened around it. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. Everything I'd said was inside. His smile disappeared completely. Who told you? I shrugged. You. I've been watching you for 12 minutes. You reveal more than you think. That wasn't entirely true. My previous life had taught me exactly how people like Winston operated. Once you knew the pattern, The rest practically solved itself. Winston's eyes narrowed. So, you're not mute. I never said I was. A few executives actually laughed. The sound broke the suffocating tension. Sebastian looked like someone had slapped him. Charlotte's mouth hung open. Their idiot cousin had just dismantled the most feared hedge fund manager on Broadwell Street. Winston took a slow breath. Interesting. Very interesting. Then answer me this. If Wentworth is worth as much as you claim, why has your stock underperformed for 4 straight years? Dad looked toward me. Everyone did. I answered without hesitation. Because our management has been incompetent. The room went silent again. Uncle Frederick nearly fell out of his chair. Dad approved vanity projects. I pointed toward him. Uncle Frederick burned hundreds of millions chasing prestige developments. Then, at another executive. Our marketing department optimizes for awards instead of customers. Another. Our procurement team signs expensive contracts because they're comfortable. Another. Our software division invents products nobody explains properly to investors. One by one, every executive I pointed at lowered their head. I've spent 8 years listening. Everyone thought I wasn't paying attention. They talked freely in front of me. They confessed mistakes. They argued. They lied. They blamed each other. I remembered everything. No one could deny it. To them, I had been furniture. A silent child standing in the corner. They had never bothered hiding anything from me. I turned back to Winston. So yes, the company has been undervalued. But not because it's weak. Because the people running it have failed to communicate its value. Winston stared at me for several seconds. Then, to everyone's astonishment, he smiled. Not arrogantly. Genuinely. He slowly began clapping. Once. Twice. Then louder. Magnificent. I've spent 25 years in finance. I've never seen an 8-year-old dissect an investment thesis. He looked directly at Dad. Mr. Wentworth, I withdraw my offer. The room froze. But, he continued, I'd like to make a different proposal. Every head turned. I want to negotiate with him. He pointed directly at me. If your son is willing, I'd rather partner with Wentworth Group than compete against it. Even his own legal team looked stunned. His chief analyst leaned over and whispered urgently, Sir, if headquarters hears this. Winston cut him off without taking his eyes off me. They'll hear exactly what I tell them. Because if this child is right. He glanced at the acquisition documents. Then we nearly made the most expensive mistake in this firm's history. He extended his hand toward me across the conference table. So, Nathaniel Wentworth, shall we discuss business? Winston's phone rang. He ignored it. My answer hasn't changed, he said coldly. A child repeating investment terminology doesn't change your company's future. His phone rang again. Then a third time. His assistant glanced at the caller ID. The color drained from his face. Sir. Winston frowned. What? It's headquarters. So. They've called 3 times. He finally answered. What is it? A frantic voice exploded through the speaker. Winston, what the hell is happening? Wentworth's stock just jumped 12%. His expression stiffened. That's impossible. We don't know why. Someone is buying millions of shares. Before he could respond, another analyst shouted in the background. Correction, 18%. The conference room erupted. Dad rushed to the screen displaying the live market feed. Green. Nothing but green. The stock was climbing so fast the chart looked vertical. Winston slowly lowered the phone. I spoke calmly. The first institution figured it out. He snapped toward me. What did you do? I did nothing. I simply pointed out flaws in your valuation. Smart investors only need one hint. His assistant's laptop chimed. Another alert. Sir, Northbridge Capital just disclosed a 5% stake. Another. Hawthorne Asset Management is buying. Another. Silvercrest increased its position. The buying frenzy spread like wildfire. Winston's face finally lost every trace of confidence. No, they don't know about the AI division. I shook my head. They don't. They're buying because they know you're wrong. His phone rang again. He answered immediately. What now? The voice on the other end was furious. Cover the short. If this keeps climbing, we'll trigger margin requirements. He clenched the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. Give me 30 minutes. You have 10. The call ended. I smiled faintly. You don't have 10. The conference room doors burst open. The head of Wentworth's legal department hurried inside. Chairman. He was breathing hard. We just received confirmation from City Hall. He held up a sealed envelope. The South District rezoning has officially been approved. The room exploded. It's official? We own that land. The value just tripled. Uncle Frederick nearly collapsed into his chair. The executives who had looked defeated moments ago were suddenly shouting over each other. Dad opened the envelope with trembling hands. Approved. Effective immediately. He looked at me. You. Before he could finish, another executive ran in. Chairman, our software division just signed Horizon Dynamics. And Northstar Logistics accepted the licensing agreement 5 minutes ago. Another person rushed through the door. Helix Systems wants exclusive negotiations. Within 60 seconds, everything Winston had valued as nearly worthless had become the company's greatest asset. His assistant whispered, Sir, our projected profit and loss. Winston grabbed the tablet. His pupils shrank. The screen estimated the damage if the rally continued. Minus $2.1 billion. He stared at it, then at me. You knew? I suspected. No, he said quietly. You knew? I stepped closer. In Broadwell, you have a saying. When the market panics, the prepared get rich. You came here expecting panic. Instead, I looked around the room. You created confidence. The conference room fell silent. Every executive slowly turned toward me, not as the family's mute child, not as someone to pity, but as the person who had just saved Wentworth Group. Dad took a deep breath. Then, in front of every shareholder, every executive, and every member of the Wentworth family, he stood up. The emergency board meeting is suspended. He looked directly at Winston. And Mr. Pembroke. The acquisition discussion is over. He turned to me. From this moment forward, you'll be sitting beside me. Across the room, Sebastian's face went white. Charlotte dropped the smug smile she'd worn for years. The heir they had mocked had just become the most powerful person in the company overnight. Then Malcolm, the butler, hurried in one last time. Chairman, there's one more visitor. Dad frowned. Who? Malcolm swallowed. The chairman of Blackstone Global. He says. He flew here because he wants to meet Master Nathaniel personally. Before anyone could process Malcolm's words, another voice came from the hallway. Tell him I'm coming in anyway. The conference room doors opened. A dozen men in dark suits entered first, scanning every corner of the room. Then an elderly man with silver hair walked in carrying nothing but a black cane. The room instantly fell silent. Even Winston's face changed. Richard Blackwell. The chairman of Blackstone Global smiled faintly. So you do recognize me. Winston immediately straightened his tie. Mr. Blackwell, I wasn't informed you were in Anoria. I wasn't here for you. Richard walked straight past him. Past Dad. Past every executive. He stopped in front of me. So, you're Nathaniel Wentworth. I nodded. He studied me for several seconds, then laughed. I finally found you. Everyone exchanged confused looks. Dad frowned. Mr. Blackwell, have you met my son before? Richard shook his head. No, but someone I respected more than anyone told me that if I ever met an 8-year-old named Nathaniel Wentworth, I should listen before speaking. The room froze. I narrowed my eyes. That sentence. I knew it. Richard reached into his briefcase and removed an old, yellowed envelope. The man who gave me this died 7 years ago. He instructed me never to open it. Unless I met you. He placed the envelope on the conference table. Across the front were 6 handwritten words. For Nathaniel. Open only when found. Every hair on my arm stood up. That handwriting. I recognized it instantly. Because it was mine. Not from this life. From my previous one. For the first time since my reincarnation. My calm cracked. I stared at the envelope without touching it. Impossible. I had died in an apartment on Broadwell Street. I had no children. No family. No chance to leave messages for another life. Yet my own signature stared back at me. Richard noticed my expression. So you recognize it. I looked up slowly. Who gave this to you? A man named Nathan Reed. The name hit me like a freight train. Nathan Reed. That had been my name before I was reborn. The conference room disappeared from my awareness. I could barely hear the people around me. Richard continued. He worked with me for nearly 15 years. He was the sharpest financial mind I'd ever met. A month before he died, he became strange. He kept saying he wouldn't be gone for long. He said he'd have one more chance. He made me swear that if I ever met an extraordinary child named Nathaniel Wentworth, I was to hand him this letter. Nobody spoke. Not even Winston. With steady hands, I broke the wax seal. Inside, there was only one sheet of paper. One sentence. Written in my own handwriting. If this letter reached you, then reincarnation is real, and you're already changing the future. Nathaniel read the letter twice. Then he quietly folded it and slipped it back into the envelope. He looked at Richard Blackwell. Thank you for keeping your promise. Richard smiled. I waited 7 years to deliver it. The promise is finally fulfilled. He turned and left without another word. The conference room remained silent long after the doors closed. Everyone was still trying to understand what had just happened. I wasn't. The letter confirmed what I needed to know. My previous life hadn't ended by accident. It had ended exactly when it was supposed to. This life wasn't a second chance to relive the past. It was a chance to do something better. I looked at Dad. For years, I'd watched him carry the weight of an entire empire while believing his only son could never inherit it. Mom had spent 8 years crying herself to sleep, convinced she'd failed me. Enough was enough. I walked over to them. For the first time in this life, I reached out and took Mom's hand. Mom. Her shoulders trembled. I've always heard every story you read to me. I've always understood every word you said. I just needed time. She burst into tears and pulled me into the tightest hug she'd ever given me. Dad turned away, pretending to adjust his glasses. No one believed it. The chairman of Wentworth Group was crying. He cleared his throat. Nathaniel, would you come to the office with me tomorrow? I smiled. I already work here. The room erupted in laughter. Even the tension from Winston's takeover had disappeared. As for Winston, his board removed him as lead portfolio manager within a week after the failed raid cost his fund billions. The financial press called it the most embarrassing takeover attempt of the decade. Broadwell Street, which had once treated him like a king, quickly moved on. In finance, success earns admiration. Failure earns replacement. Meanwhile, Wentworth Group announced its AI platform, the South District Technology Park, and a series of global partnerships. The company's market value more than quadrupled within a year. Every shareholder who had doubted the family celebrated. Every cousin who had mocked me suddenly wanted to be my friend. I politely declined. Some opportunities only come once. So do first impressions. Years later, after I officially became chairman of Wentworth Group, a reporter asked me the question everyone wanted answered. Mr. Wentworth, why didn't you speak until you were 8? I smiled. Because everyone around me was talking. I learned more by listening than I ever could by interrupting. The quote spread around the world. Business schools printed it in textbooks. Investors framed it in their offices. Only I knew the real reason. I had spent one lifetime talking. This lifetime, I learned exactly when a few words were worth more